Just join. So we're going to start in a couple minutes. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. So feel free to have your cameras off if you don't feel like having your face recorded for this. And while we're waiting, please take a couple minutes or a couple seconds to fill out our Zoom poll. Adrian has posted that, so everyone should be able to access that. And if not, you can message Adrian in the chat. I'm so excited tonight to see the amazing turnout from everyone and very excited to get into discussion with our amazing panelists. And it should be a great night with everyone. So I think I'm going to wait a couple more seconds before we begin and intros and everything, just to see if more people kind of come in. But it's great to see how many people we have. This is amazing. Okay, I think I'm going to get started here with some intros about Hardy Girls, Healthy Women. So this is our second season of Ruckus Roundtables. Today's roundtable is hosted in partnership with Maine Family Planning. My name is Sarah Doore. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a member of the Girls Advisory Board. This is my first year on the board. And I'm super excited to be hosting this. I've never done this before, so if I make a couple mistakes, please cut me a little bit of slack. I am from the Bangor area, but I live in Waterville and I attend Waterville Senior High School. I have had a very strong interest in destigmatizing teen sexual health and have been trying to increase access to accurate queer-friendly sexual health information in my schools for a number of years. I found it very challenging to work with administration, and so I'm very excited to hear from other the panelists and other youth people here about what they have to say about their communities. I'm so excited to moderate this panel tonight on sexual health. We have put together a really exciting group of panelists. I'm going to do some really short introductions, but you can see their full bios on the website and we can save more time for the discussion. We do ask our audience to mute yourself and prevent background noise. But we encourage you to drop your questions and comments in the chat box. As I mentioned before, we are recording this conversation and we'll make the recording available to folks who have registered. If you do not want your image included, please turn off your camera. If you haven't filled out our poll, please do so now. If you have any logistical or technical questions, feel free to message in the chat and Hardy Girl staff will assist you. Before we get started, we do need to acknowledge the land that we are living on. While this is a virtual event, Hardy Girls, Healthy Women, their headquarters is in Waterville, Maine, and works with young people statewide. This is stolen land from the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is currently comprised of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac peoples. We encourage non-Indigenous attendees to spend time learning about the ways Wabanaki people have cared for this land over the centuries, as well as the ways Mainers can engage in truth, healing, and reconciliation with Wabanaki reach. Additionally, we ask that Maine-based attendees tune in to your current state legislative session, learn about the Tribal Sovereignty Bill, LD 1626, and contact your legislators to share your thoughts. Now we're going to introduce our panel, starting with Bogi. Bogi Szalai uses she, her pronouns, is in the 10th grade at an early college high school in New Mexico, and is a youth ambassador for AMAZE, an organization that harnesses the power of digital media to provide young adolescents around the globe with medically accurate, age-appropriate, affirming, and honest sex education that they can access directly online. Regardless of where they live or what school they attend, she is Hungarian and lived there for 2 years and lived there for 2 years and is very excited to be here as a panelist. Welcome, Bogi. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't mention?
No, you summed it up very well. Thank you.
Next, we have Jennifer Wiessner. Jennifer uses she, her pronouns and is a licensed clinical social worker at AASECT, certified sex therapist, sex educator, and presenter in Cumberland, Maine. She has a private therapy and sexual health consultation practice and sees couples, groups, and adult individuals and creates and facilitates the Girls on Fire for Teens and the popular Raising Sexuality, Healthy Children workshops to educate parents, medical providers, and educators on why talking to youth about sexuality is healthy, necessary, and a normal part of life. Hi, Jennifer. It's so exciting to have you here. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I am a mom to 2 teenage sons, so I thought I would add that. So I have that layer as well. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Of course. Next, we have Maya Williams, uses they, she pronouns, and is a Black multiracial suicide survivor who is currently in the 7th Poet Laureate of Portland, Maine. You can follow more of Air work at mayawilliamspoet.com. I got to see Maya at the Mayan conference this last fall, and I was so amazed by their work and am so excited to hear more of Air experiences. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Maya?
Thank you so much for your kind words, and thank you to Hardy Girls Healthy Women for having me. Some other context, I work with trans survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence with the organization Maine Transnet, and you can look up more of our work online.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Next, we have Vanessa Shields-Haas. I don't believe we have the pronouns here, but I believe she uses she, her pronouns. Correct me if I'm wrong. But she is a family nurse practitioner at Maine Family Planning in Thomaston, where she provides sexual and reproductive health care, and gender affirming care. She serves on the board of Maine's LGBTQ youth advocacy organization, Out Maine. She has worked as a forensic nurse examiner for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. Vanessa shares her life with her wife, daughter, and various rescue animals. Welcome, Vanessa. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks for that great intro, and I'm really excited to be here with y'all.
Finally, we have Tehya Robertson. Tehya uses they, them pronouns and is a student at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. They are working towards graduating with a major in women and gender studies and a minor in applied performance. Tehya has a passion for feminism, learning, and consequently unlearning and interacting with others throughout conversation. Welcome, Tehya. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I'm just happy to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Of course, we are so excited. So we're gonna move on to questions now. We're a couple minutes ahead of schedule. This is our discussion portion where I will be asking each of our panelists questions. While I'll direct our first few questions towards individual panelists, I encourage anyone to chime in with thoughts. Also, if participants have questions that they have, you can chat with Adrienne and she will write them down for later in this discussion. So I'm going to begin with Bogi. You are a youth ambassador for AMAZE. Can you kind of explain what does that entail and how did you get involved in the first place?
So thank you, Sarah. So AMAZE is an organization about teaching kids accurate sex ed that is medically accurate, as well as has like a range of topics. And so AMAZE entails, so being a youth ambassador entails doing surveys from the youth perspective and how you feel, like how we feel truly about AMAZE and the content that they're producing. And so when I got involved with AMAZE, my mom was the one who had shown me AMAZE videos. And so I saw that they had an ambassador program. And so I joined. And so I've been doing it for 3 years. And it's really nice. And like through AMAZE, I get opportunities like being on this panel today. And it's really, I mean, we always make the joke that AMAZE is amazing because it truly is. And it just has so much, it's to get sex ed for everyone and make sure it's accurate, and also have a variety of not just sex ed, but also mental health and, you know, everything that's gonna happen when you are like in teen, when you're younger. And it's just very helpful, and it's also global. So it's very great.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing answer. And it's just incredible the work that AMAZE does and that you have done that really impact youth. So you were doing a great job. Next, we're going to move on to Tehya. So you're interested in using performance art to educate about consent. What about performance theater makes it an effective tool for sexual health education?
So I am a true believer that everybody can find their place within theater and within performance and performance art. And I've always been drawn to that theater for that exact reason. It's really useful to me to be able to imagine myself, people that are like me, people that are not necessarily like me, others that I may experience, and be able to kind of imagine ourselves in these situations and see how they potentially can play out. And for that reason, and for numerous other reasons, I think that theater can really be powerful. It can be transformative. It can be revolutionary for all of those that engage actively and have like an open mind when they are engaging with it. To be able to act out and to see and to hear and to just fully experience, just like maybe seeing a situation in this example, like actors acting out a scene, and being able to see a part being played over, or maybe being acted out in a different way, or maybe even acted out by two completely different actors in general, because it's really different how you may perceive the situation when there's different actors in the role. I just really think that overall is a really interactive and accessible way to engage with like such a taboo topic of, which it really shouldn't be, but such a taboo topic of like sex and consent against the education as well.
Wow, that's an amazing belief. And, you know, to have something that really connects different people and people who are very similar is so important, especially when talking about topics that have been historically very taboo. Just a kind of reminder from Adrian to fill out the poll that was sent out at the beginning of the call. For those of you who have joined late, you should be able to find it in your bottom tool bar in the Zoom. So next, we're going to move on to Vanessa. So in your experience, both as a nurse practitioner and your role at Maine, how are you seeing LGBTQ plus youth get access or not get access to accurate queer-friendly sexual health education?
I love this question. I'm going to start with the more challenging aspects and move to the more positive aspects. So we know that sexual health disparities are encountered by LGBTQ youth, and that's seen in some of our public health data that talks to us about certain poor health outcomes among that community. What we do know is that stigmatization and discrimination happens in our schools. It happens in Maine, and it happens nationally. There are 4 states that explicitly have legislation that says that there is no discussion of homosexuality at all in sexual education. Even states like Maine, there are no guarantees that young people are going to get inclusive sexual and reproductive healthcare information in schools. And the result of that, it leaves youth without the information they need to make good decisions about their sexual health. And that's one of the reasons, I know we're going to talk about the media later, but that's one of the reasons why LGBTQ youth are 5 times more likely to go to the internet to get information about their sexual health. So it's an uphill climb when nationally 5% of LGBTQ youth say that they've been taught positive things about the LGBTQ community in their sexual health classes. However, what we know about young people is that youth are thinking deeply about gender and equity, and that they are actually driving these conversations. And things like gay, straight, trans alliances have been really impactful. And I'm sure that some of you have been involved in those sorts of things. And I want to thank you for carrying this burden that the grown-ups in your life, you're having to sort of drag them to the conversation. So I just want to give that, that thanks to you all. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I myself am a queer youth who has been through public school in that sexual health program, or health class as they normally call it. And there's just a complete lack of queer representation. And I know a lot of my peers have struggled with identity and support because of the lack of resources in the schools. So moving on, Maya, you have worked with survivors of suicide and sexual violence, and you are an amazing advocate for mental health. In your experience, how can we ensure the conversation about sexual health and sexual health education includes the impact that trauma plays?
For sure. This idea that that sexual health and trauma are not interconnected unless it's talked about, unless sexual violence is part of the conversation, is not true. Similarity that sexual health and trauma share is that both recur around the body. When talking about sexual health, we're talking a lot about our bodies and pleasure in our bodies and pain in our bodies. When we were talking about trauma, we are talking about what is happening to the body and how our body reacts to it. So how do we talk about trauma from corrective assault for trans youth? How do we talk about the rife amount of representation of white sexuality being celebrated, but not Black sexuality being celebrated? How that inflicts upon the trauma for people of color, of marginalized genders? It's all connected.
Thank you so much for that answer. That's amazing, and hopefully it will set some or influence some questions and thoughts that people will think about after and during later discussions. So Jennifer, as a relationship and sex therapist, what issues do you see coming up most or most often for your clients that could have been addressed by changing the way young people have access to sexual health education and information?
That's a great question, Sarah. I think some of the things that I notice in my practice really have to do with the, to Maya's point, the disconnection from body, desire and pleasure, all three of those things, due to the avoidance of teaching youth, especially female identified children and teens, about the relevance and the importance of sexuality and pleasure in their lives. And here we live in a sex saturated culture. I would say it's sex saturated and yet sex silent. And again, for most youth, particularly those with vulvas, they're not taught that sexual pleasure and body joy is for them. And so many of my clients, particularly the ones that say they were raised as female, tell me they were never taught that sexual agency was something that they were meant to access. It was not for them. They were meant to really be gatekeepers, not pursuers of their own pleasure. So I see a lot of that in my practice. And I feel like if we have the trusted adults who are educated, both educators, but as parents and guardians, and adults who influence medical providers, they're really the people that need to be shepherding kids through their sexuality, and it's still just not happening.
Thank you so much for that. It's great to see that already, the topics that we're talking about, and even though they're very specific to each person, they are all very interconnected. And this is going to lead us into our next set of questions and discussion, which is questions for all of our panelists. And so even though this is a very big question and looks very different in many different places, what do you want the sexual health information landscape to look like for young people? I think this is an important question kind of to set all of our other discussions on later on.
If I may interject here, it would be fantastic to see the landscape inclusive, not just in regards to inclusive of people of feminine identities or folks assigned female at birth, but inclusive of everybody. And I name that because when we say phrases such as female identified, that ends up excluding a whole range of people who could be contributing a lot to the conversation, such as trans women, such as non-binary folks, whether assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And when we talk about the stats when it comes to sexual violence, trans women tend to be excluded more from homeless shelters in the state of Maine. Trans women tend to be sexually assaulted in a more physical manner, or trans feminine folks assigned male at birth. So wanting to be inclusive of the full scope of various forms of intersectionality when we talk about the feminine, or when we talk about all genders who receive harm. And that's not to say that we erase conversations around how certain identities face marginalization, especially because we are talking at a panel right now for folks who are typically socialized as women, but my point still stands.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, Tehya, go ahead.
Going off of that, one of the first things that comes to mind what I would like the sexual landscape for like youth to be accessible and inclusive. And I want it to be both sex neutral, but also sex positive, if that's the route that you choose to go. I want there to be like a confidence in being able to navigate maybe difficult situations within their own sexual identity. And I want that accessibility and inclusivity to, once again, not just be for like people of color, Black people, or like people of different gender identities, but also like disabled folks too, because they also get excluded from the conversation a lot. And I think that is really, really important to be able to focus on creating a space that all of these identities can be celebrated for all of their differences and similarities in that way.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Bogi.
I think that the sexual health landscape, you should have more like queer friendly as opposed to just heterosexual like content, because that's like a very big issue that I see especially from AMAZE, and we've talked about that several times. We have that discussion. And then also like having inclusivity, there we go. Like Tehya said, for disabled folks as well, because they usually get left out. And just having, like have less taboo topics, and just have it so that, you can talk about things without it being like a sex neutral, sex positive environment.
I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to add before we move on to the next question. You're welcome to unmute yourself and just kind of interject and say whatever you want. Yeah, go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think just building off of what everybody said, thinking about having sexual education that doesn't assume heterosexuality, that doesn't assume a binary, that there's gender literacy as part of that education, and that there's many ways to make a family, that there's a discussion about intimate partner violence and healthy relationships, and not, that includes all of the students that are hoping one day to have relationships. And to also include LGBTQ young people around protection from sexually transmitted infections, discussions around birth control, discussions around abortion care, and not assuming what types of contact people are going to have throughout their lifespan. They need to be equipped with that information to make healthy decisions for themselves.
Thank you so much for that. Again, if there's anyone else who wants to kind of say something about this question, I'm going to kind of move on to the next question to keep things rolling. So if you are a young person who wants to change the sexual health conversation or available information in your school, what is the first step you should take? Go ahead, Bogi.
So as someone who is like one of those youth and with AMAZE, so first you need to have, like, we actually talked about this last meeting, but you need to have a target of who, like, people you know that you can talk to. Because if you don't know, like, who's a good teacher or who's a good board person to talk to, then you're going to have like some difficulty really having like starting that discussion of, okay, what is like accurate sex health, like sexual education and like sexual health that is also queer friendly and just friendly to all people. And so you really have to know who, like, what teachers you can talk to, and kind of knowing the power of those teachers to take it even a step further. And you really just have to try, and you also have to know your point and have people to support you, you know, have a group of friends and just try to expand it so you get your goal and you're supported by other people as well.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I know throughout like my own struggles, it's been really hard, and to communicate with administration and having to find like a very specific person to help advocate for my point or others' points who are not adults, because voices are often not listened to. Do any of the other panelists have anything to say about this question? Tehya.
So I actually took 2 semesters of a course that was called Applied Performance for Sexual Consent. And it was from 2 leaders from the Speak About It organization. I believe somebody put a link to their information in the chat as well already. And I think that it's really important to just initially start with just having that conversation. Just like whether it's with like your peers, whether it's with someone that you trust, whether it's with an adult, your parent, just initially starting and having that conversation and to be able to approach the topic in general, I feel like is a great start, because it's already something that's difficult to navigate. It's already something that's taboo. So I think that there's just a lot of power in just having that initial start of having just a conversation to begin with. Whether you plan on doing something with it within administration or just within your own personal life, I think it's really important to just start, because often starting is the hardest thing to do with most things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. I'm going to move on to the next question just to kind of keep things on track. So I know Vanessa mentioned earlier about media. So what representation of youth sexual health have people seen in recent movies or TV that you didn't like or you thought was positive and you did like?
I'll jump in.
I like that. Oh.
Sex Education on Netflix. Love it. Watch it with your parents. It's just not enough good things to say about it.
Thank you.
I love that there are more animated shows now for folks of younger ages that are able to depict like how to handle rejection in a non-toxic way and in a loving way, or how cartoons such as Steven Universe is able to depict power dynamics within relationships that are centered on romance. So shout out to cartoons that are teaching young people more about consent than anyone I've ever met.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, was there anything else you wanted to add about what Vanessa had said before I go on to Bogi?
Sure, I could add on 3 more love. But I think what I loved about it when I watched it with my son was that it was pretty amazing that they were able to put so many social issues, concerns, and representations in one series. Like, I don't know that I've ever really, it was fantastic.
Great, thank you so much. Bogi, sorry to cut you off there.
No, it's fine. So while a lot of representation, like for, I guess, the LGBTQ community is getting a lot better, there's still kind of like regarding Jennifer's like previous points, there is some like issues still regarding like the like pleasure, I guess, of women. And, you know, that's an issue, as well as kind of like you still see a lot more heterosexual like representation than anything else. And like in shows like, for example, Euphoria, it's a very intense show that doesn't necessarily focus on like other people's like the issues that are in that show. While yes, they are real issues, people need to realize that like reality and TV are very separate. And so there needs to be some TV shows that are more accurate to like how the world actually is like depicted, as opposed to just saying like, this is how it is, and you know, there's nothing else.
Yeah, thank you so much
I
for that.
I appreciate Bogi naming that, because what I often talk about in presentations for work, like for example, when talking about porn as a form of media, like pornography is not the only form of media that has been responsible for misrepresenting trans people or posing them in a negative light or exploiting them. General popular media has as well. Because the majority of the majority professions that transgender people have been portrayed on television has been through the realm of sex work. And yes, sex work is real work. And at the same time, why is this the only profession we are seeing trans people in? And why do we continue seeing trans people in pain after sexual assault or after being battered?
Thank you so much for that, Maya. I don't know if, yeah, go ahead, Tehya.
The original series, Degrassi, I don't know if it's Next Generation or the original series. Either way, I feel like Degrassi is also a pretty decent show for like introducing like different topics, different dynamics of different like situations. I feel like that was probably one of the first real shows that I watched that like wasn't animated, that like portrayed a queer couple or like a trans experience. And I think that was really important for me. So I would say Degrassi as well.
Great, thank you so much.
One day at a time, and everything else that the creator from One Day at a Time has created after that, it's worth checking out as far as queer representation and sexuality for young people and adults.
I have a reminder from Adrian that you can drop questions for the panelists in the chat, and we will get to them later on. So I'm going to kind of keep it rolling, and I'm going to go to the next question. So this is more for Maya, but we know that sexuality and sexual health has long been racialized. Maya, you wrote in a 2020 essay, I observed that when white women celebrate being sexual, they are revolutionary. When Black women celebrate being sexual, we are up for question. How can sexual health education and messaging combat the anti-Blackness and other forms of racism that have so long been a part of the conversation around sexuality?
That's a really good question. And I appreciate you pulling up an oldie but a goodie. I wrote that essay for the Black Youth Project a few years ago about my work with Speak About It, actually, at the time. And oftentimes in my work, whether it's in my artwork or my work at Maine Transnet, there is a common myth around like, oh, religion is the cause of a lot of separation. And while there is truth in that, like we need to acknowledge that there has been harm caused by science as well. When being taught sex ed at a young age, the only skin color I have seen when looking at the bodily graphs have been people of white skin, of white people's bodies. So already from a young age, you see Black Indigenous people of color thinking about like, oh, so white people have sexual bodies, but I don't have a sexual body. So it's this weird thing where people of color, particularly black women in media, may be portrayed as either hypersexual or asexual in a more stereotypical way, not talking about asexuality like in a positive light when talking about black women or black femmes sexuality. And in order to combat that anti-blackness, we need to make sure that young people have access to a variety of content and consent educators of different racial backgrounds, of different intersectionalities, different religious backgrounds, different non-religious backgrounds. We need to make sure that we need to see body graphs of different skin colors. We need to make sure that there's entertainment available for people of different racial backgrounds and different sexual orientations, different gender identities. Even the HBO show, the secret sex lives of college girls. I'm getting the name mixed up, but it's a show created by Mindy Kaling, and the portrayal of women of color's sexuality in that show is very impressive, and I would highly recommend that. For example, Sex Lives of College Girls. Thank you so much, person in the chat. And other ways to combat that anti-blackness is also encouraging like healthy communication about it. This idea around like, oh, if we don't talk about it, that means it doesn't exist. Or if we don't talk about it, if you retain it, that means that you won't do anything bad with that sexuality. And a lot of that messaging has been from patriarchy, from conservative religious backgrounds that uphold patriarchy, so on and so forth. So it just really starts, and just needs to start at a young age in order to encourage people of their self-worth, and also acknowledging how white people have a race as well. I've performed poems and have facilitated trainings where a white person may feel racialized in the space for the first time, and then they feel attacked, and they would give anonymous feedback about me being combative or defensive, when in actuality, like, the one person who's being defensive is that white person. So how do we acknowledge how everyone is racialized in a sense, and not put whiteness on this pedestal that has always been placed there for so long in and out of sexual health?
Thank you so much. That was an amazing answer, Maya. Sorry to put you a little bit on the spot there with that question, but you did amazing. I'm going to go to another kind of more individual question for Bogi. When we think about sexual health education, there are tools like AMAZE's website and obviously school sex ed curriculums. But so much of what young people learn about sexual health comes from the media. What are the challenges of that, and what are the benefits? I know we've talked a little bit about this already, and other people are, of course, welcome to jump in with opinions. But Bogi, take it away.
So with media, it gets a little bit confusing because, I mean, with the internet, there's so many benefits. And like with media, it gets confusing because you're going to see like how porn is like not necessarily a positive effect on like youth, especially for like the representation it shows, where it has lack of, anything, well, not anything, but there's a lot of lack of LGBTQ, like inclusion, as well as there's like just false like statements. It's not medically accurate and it's not true, which will give youth kind of like a not medically accurate look on like sex ed and how just like, especially like taboo topics. But a lot of benefits that like are seen with media today are like, you have access to something like AMAZE, and it's easier to kind of make it known through like any social medias. You can kind of say like, hey, check this out. This is a really good informative website and YouTube channel that has it. And, it's like you can have people to talk to through media, but it's just very difficult to a certain extent to find that accurate information, at least from what we've seen at AMAZE.
Yeah, Jennifer.
Just to go sort of one layer underneath that, just because it's the work that I do, my focus in my Raising Sexually Healthy Children work is accessing parents and getting them to do the job of being the folks in kids' lives who are bringing them that information. So we are not relying so heavily on schools. We are not relying so heavily on kids who are just on the internet and expected to somehow know where to go. And so I know some of my work, like with the vertical team at Portland Public Health, my role, or public schools changing the curricula, is sort of helping them reintegrate parents into this conversation, because that's where this work really belongs from the beginning, from birth. So I just wanted to add that other layer. And thank goodness for AMAZE, because I use it all the time with the parents I work with.
Yeah, Bogi.
So adding on to that as well, with the education like sex ed, again, there's like the lack of LGBTQ representation, as well as kind of like kids are going to be immature and not necessarily take like the importance of sex ed seriously, which is a huge issue, because you need to know, like, especially if you're going to be having sex at like a younger age, you need to know how to, like, you know, be preventative with stuff like birth control, using condoms, like any contraceptives, and like how to properly use them, as well as like with sex ed, you know, like it's not a taboo thing. And you need, like, it needs to be talked about, as opposed to kind of just making like a joke about it. Like, it is a serious thing. And having like the instructors that do teach sex ed, they need to have like accurate, like medically accurate, as well as like kind of like inclusive information. And I really like what Jennifer said, by the way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Vanessa.
I just wanted to also add that around sexual health, there's this danger of misinformation. And I see this a lot in practice, where people are using things on their bodies that are very irritating, and it can cause like a contact dermatitis and rashes, using like herbs and ointments and lotions in places that they shouldn't be used. It's problematic. And also, vulvas come in all different shapes and sizes, and knowing that and learning that in sexual education can help people be maybe a little bit more kind to themselves as they move through life in their sexual relationships. So those are just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know if any of the other panelists have something. Yeah, Bogi.
I was also going to add, teaching people who aren't like born female, like your partner, or, you know, your significant other, like if you do have a period, like how, like learning about that and how it affects your body, how it affects your mental health, how it just affects you in general. Because while like it's a lot in sex ed, it's not talked about how women go through like the cycle every month, and then how is that going to affect like even fertility and your sex, like having sex with that person, because it's such an important thing. And, you know, it happens like once a month for most women. And so how is that going to affect you as well as your partner, and just the body, like how the process, I guess, of the menstrual cycle as well.
And to follow up with that, to talk more about trans bodies through medical transition, and also when talking about gender dysphoria, what different folks may process about their bodies, and how not everyone goes through gender dysphoria. There are trans men who say my vulva is a man's vulva. There are trans women who say my penis is still a woman's penis, and how to have that expansive conversation about bodies and sexual health as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to our last question before we go into the audience questions. And I think this is a pretty good one to end on. So what is a good piece of sexual health education / advice you've gotten from people in your life?
it's okay to talk about joy and pleasure too. Because like I often tell people I signed up for the jobs that I signed up for out of spite, because I'm so done with like doom and gloom presentations about sex ed, about social justice competency, so on and so forth. And or like here's a presentation about feminism, and oh, here's one slide about trans people, all these doom and gloom statistics, and that's the last time you hear about trans people. Like we can talk about the, like, yes, please know the safety concerns when it comes to sex, and what are the pleasures of having sex, what brings you joy when you have sex, what brings you joy if you're choosing not to have sex, or if you identify as asexual, how does that joy bring for you? Like when we talk about trans joy, for example, like there is a 50% risk reduction of suicidality for trans people when there is one supportive adult in that child's life. Like why aren't more folks hearing about that in schools when talking about like comprehensive sex ed and consent ed?
Thank you so much for sharing that. Tehya, I saw that you had your hand raised.
I was gonna say this is more of a ground rule that we associated like with ourselves within that applied performance class that I took. And I think I want to credit Aronde for it, but he said that it's okay to be raggedy. And they were saying that in reference to like, it's okay to not have all the thoughts there. It's okay to not know all of the terminology, to not have all of the words and the vocabulary to be able to have a conversation. Like the fact that, once again, that you're getting started with the conversation in general, it's a little victory that should be celebrated and on its own. So I believe that it's okay to be raggedy is a rule that I have applied to so many things in my life, but in particular can definitely be applied to consent education as well. Thank
you so much. Yeah, Bogi.
So from AMAZE, like we have discussions every 2 weeks around. And so something we were talking about like I think it was February, earlier this month, was that like being alone, like not having a partner is okay. And it doesn't make you any less of, and it's a fine thing, especially around like things like Valentine's Day. You don't have to be like in a relationship to have like to be happy, and to like you can reward yourself, and you don't have to just wait for other people to reward you as well. And like it's okay to not be in a relationship, because you need to know what's important for you, and you shouldn't be being in a relationship for someone just because you feel like you have to be with them. As well as the whole conversation about consent, because that's something we always talk about, which is obviously because it's so important. And so those two things are something that like are very important, and I love that AMAZE talks about
them. I would just add two things that have stuck with me throughout life. The vagina, or whatever term that an individual calls that area, is self-cleaning. And if it smells a little bit off or different, that's a good indication that there might be something going on. So covering it up with other scents like douching can actually mask something that could be more serious. So yeah, so that's one that I think is important, self-cleaning vagina. And the other one is getting tested for sexually transmitted infections before having intercourse with someone is sexy. And if someone isn't really interested in that or finds that upsetting, that perhaps maybe that would be a red flag to think about.
Thank you so much for that. Are there any other panelists who would like to answer that question before we move on? Okay, so now we're going to go into the audience questions, as we are running a little bit behind because of all the amazing conversation that has been happening, which is no problem at all. We're only going to do a couple of these. So the first one is audience member asked, with regard to teaching and discussing pleasure and joy around sexuality and intimacy, what do you recommend for the school setting, middle school versus high school? Yeah, Bogi.
So with middle school and high school, with middle school, I think you should talk about like puberty a little bit more, since that's going to be the time where, I mean, majority of people will start. And you should talk about like pleasure though, which is something that is like rarely discussed in sex ed. But in high school, you should kind of have more topics that are really based around like the sexual and intimate aspects, as opposed to more of like the puberty and like your body, like how it looks, how it works. While that still should be included, you should focus more on like intimacy and pleasure, and kind of like what those mean and how you're taking those steps in a relationship, or if you're not in a relationship, like how you approach that conversation with someone, and how you kind of just knowing like what you should do, and also being safe.
Yeah, Jennifer.
I have the pleasure of being able to sit with very squeamish adults when I bring this up in my workshops, and trying to get them comfortable with that idea, getting them comfortable with talking about pleasure. And what I use sometimes in synonym form, like I say pleasure and I say body joy, trying to get them to sort of put those two things together. And one of the most common, sadly, common things that comes to consultation for me is parents or adults that influence children coming to me saying, my 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old is touching themselves in the living room or doing it at school, and really just having to bring them down. And so we live in this culture that is so terrified of childhood pleasure. And yeah, that's part of my work and many of you here. So I'm glad we have this spider web of people working on that.
Thank you so much. Are there any other panelists who want to touch on that at all before I move on? Okay, we're gonna
advocates for. I just wanted to say real quick, Advocates for Youth online has a K through 12 sex ed curriculum that's free, and it encompasses the Centers for Disease Control 16 recommended topics for sexual education. So that might be something to look into as well.
Something to add about Advocates for Youth. So Advocates for Youth and AMAZE work like, I guess, pretty directly with each other. And so actually the director of Advocates for Youth is like part of our meetings usually, and they have amazing resources. And, you know, like Vanessa said, they just have a great, like, I guess, like they have those topics, especially for the K through 12, because, you know, that's when sex ed is usually being taught. And so that's something that I love to recommend to people, is because, you know, it's a lot of advocacy for the youth. And so that's also kind of why we move, like, that's why AMAZE, like, we directly work with them all the time, pretty much.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that. I think the other question that we're gonna touch on before we kind of close up this roundtable is, how does body positivity and body consciousness tie into sexual health, and why is it important?
It directly ties to self-esteem. It directly ties to one's relationship with their trauma. When we talk about body image and body positivity, like the emphasis on the word body, so does, again, just going back to my point about like how sexual health and trauma are related, like they're both talking about the body. And when marginalized people don't have a positive outlook on their body, how are they going to feel with someone in the bedroom or someone on a date? How will they be in a relationship with someone who could provide that support for them to feel good about themselves? Or is that partner obligated to do that at all in the first place? Only 3% of trans people in the state of Maine are 100% happy with the way that they look. That's very much related to sexual health education. How do we make young people feel better about the way that they look, regardless of their gender identity? How do we make all people of all various intersectional identities feel good about the way they look, so that they can feel pleasure by themselves or with the people that they love or the people they want to have intimate connection with?
Thank you so much, Maya, for that. I don't know if anyone else wanted to touch on that before we kind of close things.
I see in practice a lot when people are in a vulnerable position, getting an exam done, the apologies that they give for their body about having hair in certain places or not having hair in certain places or different body shapes. And I just want to take a moment for us all to just be reflective about the things we say to ourselves about our bodies, and the shame that we might be carrying with ourselves, and just take a moment for that.
Thank you so much for that, Vanessa. Okay, and with that, unless there's anything else our panelists want to mention before I kind of summarize everything and talk a little bit more about Hardy Girls. Okay, so thank you so much to all of our panelists. You have been absolutely amazing. And if everyone could give a silent applause from their screens or a little emoji reaction, that would be awesome, because you all have been so amazing. And we are so grateful for how many attendees we have gotten as well. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you all so much. And so with that, anyone who is familiar with Hardy Girls knows that when we hold events such as these Ruckus Roundtables, we don't want more than just conversation. As awesome as conversation can be, as we've seen tonight, we want to push for action as well. And just as these panelists have shared what they are doing, we want to leave all of you with some steps to take to get involved. There is a spectrum of action you can take, from realizing your voice and power to taking it to the streets and everything in between. There is not only one right way to make a change, so don't let fear paralyze you. There is a lane for everyone, and we're excited for you to find yours. I'm going to hand the floor to Maddie from this event's co-sponsor, Maine Family Planning, to share a little bit about what they do and how you can get involved.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Maddie. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm on the education team at Maine Family Planning. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having us as a co-sponsor, and for all the panelists. I think I'm really kind of taking it all in, like how much wisdom each of you had as panelists. And I also know that everyone here who didn't get to speak holds a lot of wisdom. When I think about a lot of the shame and stigma around this topic, I know that shame can't survive when we speak, right? It thrives in silence. And so if we can all break that silence and share that wisdom in our questions with the people in our lives, then that can be one small way that we can move forward with promoting sexual health for ourselves and young people in our lives. So a little bit about Maine Family Planning. So we work to ensure that all Maine people have access to high quality, affordable sexual and reproductive health care, comprehensive sexual health education, and the right to control their reproductive lives. So we have 18 brick and mortar clinics across the state of Maine, and we also have telehealth services, which are awesome. I used them myself this spring after a round of antibiotics, and then I needed something for a yeast infection, because as Vanessa knows, things like that can throw off your flora. So if you need that quick call, telehealth appointments are super easy to make. You can make them from your phone, tablet, computer. I encourage folks to get on. It's an accessible way to access care. In addition to our clinics and clinical services, we have an education team. So I know a lot of folks here might be students or work in schools or work with students. And so we support educators in schools across the state in implementing comprehensive sexual health education. We have some pretty good laws in Maine in terms of 2019, we passed that high schools have to talk about affirmative consent. But we also know that in the state of Maine that what is actually taught, there's a lot of local control, right? So you all as parents or family members or students do have power, and sometimes the voices that are less supportive of talking about sexual health are the loudest voices. So I encourage folks to thank your nurses at your school if you have a nurse, thank your health teachers, and ask them how you can support the work that they're doing. Reach out to administrators and say, this topic is really important to me. What are the policies and protocols, what are the curriculum, and how can we support making sure those are inclusive for all students, regardless of their gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, race, ethnicity, etc. Ability. Reach out because your voices do matter. To get involved, I encourage folks to go on our website. And two things that I wanted to highlight from our website is, first of all, we have a Rockin' annual conference. That's coming up in April this year, and it's virtual. And the theme this year is Sex Ed for All. So we have Tanya Bass, who's an amazing educator, going to be our keynote speaker, and we have awesome workshops as well. Scholarships are available if cost is prohibitive for folks. Another thing I want folks to know about is I want you to know your rights. So especially as minors have a right to access confidential sexual and reproductive health care in the state of Maine. We just created this Teen Pocket Guide, and we want you to take a look at it so you know your rights to care. Let's see, what else am I missing? I think that might be it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can sign up for our email. And we have regular trainings and events so you can get involved in many ways. But thank you so much for having us.
Yay, thank you so much, Maddie. That was awesome, and everyone should definitely go check out their website to see how they can get involved and learn more about Maine Family Planning. So I'm sorry we're a little bit over 8 o'clock, but thank you so much for joining us tonight at our Sexual Health Ruckus Roundtable. Our roundtables this spring are made possible by the generous support of the Maine Humanities Council. At Hardy Girls Healthy Women, we strive to keep our programming free or low cost, so we do appreciate your donations to make that happen. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and go cause a ruckus. Hope everyone has a great rest of your night. Thank you so much for coming.
And thank you, Sarah. Well done, Sarah.